Greetings, everybody. This is your host, Sophia Nelson, Vice Chairwoman of the Virginia Forward Party. And we are here for a special dialogue and conversation with Dr. Colita Fairfax, who is a professor of social justice at Norfolk State University, one of our great HBCUs here in the Commonwealth. She's a historiographer, what a great word, of Virginia's Commission on Historic Statutes at the U.S. Capitol. She is the president of the Barrett Peak Heritage Foundation, and please check that out and consider donating. It's one of our great historical sites here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, along with myself, of course, one of our great Divine Nine sororities and fraternities. And she's a dear friend. And I wanted to have her on today on our Forward Fireside Chat as we celebrate 249 years of America. Next year is the sesquicentennial at 250 years. And in Virginia, we celebrate Virginia 250 as well, going into next June 29th, 1776 and 2026. There's a lot of sixes there. You got to get it right. Anyway, Dr. Fairfax, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having, thank you so much for having me. Thank you. And I just have such love and admiration for you, sis. I want you to know that.
Too kind. But listen, let's get right into it. First of all, Dr. Fairfax, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you teach at Norfolk State University, and talk a little bit about our great HBCUs here in the Commonwealth and why they matter so much.
So I've been at Norfolk State University almost 26 years this year, and I have the awesome privilege of teaching policy courses with strong historical content, teach racism and ethnicity at the master's level, also teach some practice courses. I'm also very active in the Center for African American Public Policy, and so we do planned forums. You were featured in one of our forums last school year around policy issues facing the African American community. 250 years is a bit of a conundrum, because while the Commonwealth of Virginia celebrates 250 years, there's also a sense that many of us see it as a betrayal of freedom for everyone. And I think the presence of HBCUs in the Commonwealth are signifiers of the betrayal of freedom, because those schools, and I can name them: Virginia Union University, Virginia State University, Norfolk State University, and the Virginia University in Lynchburg were created because of this need for educating not only Black and Indigenous people, but the need to uplift. So education is just not to get a degree, but it's to uplift, it's to advance the community, is to advance yourself in every way of life, and also to advance knowledge. And we had to do that on our own devices. There was no sense that the Commonwealth dispensed in their budgets equal funding for our HBCUs. And so the presence of HBCUs are signifiers, from my judgment, of what freedom looks like.
You know, we're going to get into this because Virginia is unique. Of all the 50 states and commonwealths, of which there are a few, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, I think Massachusetts might be one as well. But we are the beginning of America. It starts in the colony in 1607, and then, of course, 1619, slavery is introduced here, at least formally, on the shores of, Hampton, Jamestown, and that region of the Commonwealth. And I think it's important in this moment, as we have so much division, so much racial division, so much tension, so much of attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the big things that I think is a problem, Dr. Fairfax, is people don't know their history, right? We're not teaching it. We are banning books. We are limiting what you can teach and what you can say because we don't want to hurt people's feelings or make them feel guilty. Can you talk a little bit about how the hell we got here in a place where in America and in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we aren't celebrating that freedom and the freedom to learn, the freedom to know, the freedom to talk about history. And in fact, we're trying to rewrite history, erase history, and keep people from knowing the truth. Talk about that why it's happening and why it matters.
So much can be said, and we don't have forever to say it. But just momentarily, I'd like for the listener to consider that for decades, there have not been meaningful policies passed to really attend to some of the broken promises of America. And I'm speaking particularly about solving and eliminating poverty, solving and eliminating homelessness, and affordability in healthcare and parity in healthcare, how to close the wealth gap. These are factors that would make a difference, particularly in the Black community, but it would also, I think, appeal to what America should be about. So since generations of Congresses refused to solve those issues, what happened is that those issues became individualized. Well, poverty is an individual issue. Homelessness is an individual issue, not then really looking at those kinds of human conditions as structural issues. And this means then you have to continue to educate people that those issues are not American, don't matter to everyone, shouldn't be everyone's concern. And you couple that then with how you teach the history of America, how you teach the development of America. It is not lost on us who study history and culture that our history, Black history, is tact, because when you study Black history, you are truly studying American history. You then bring to bear questions in your own mind about the way in which America developed, the way in which America has lived up to its sacred documents, right? The way in which America then really protects freedom, protects rights.
Let's put a pin in that for a moment. That's an Oprah aha moment. Dr. King, in his famous I Have a Dream speech on the National Mall in August of 1963, made it very clear. He said, I want you to live up to what you said on paper, right? Paraphrasing. He's talking about the Constitution. He's talking about the Declaration of Independence. And if, as our favorite son here in the Commonwealth, Thomas Jefferson, wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, stop there, all men, all mankind, all of us, are endowed by a higher being, God, our Creator, with certain rights, and their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I want our listeners, particularly because we're on a platform which is about independence. We're not Republicans or Democrats in the Forward Party. And I wanted to engage a historian and somebody who knows all of our history and all of its good and bad, because she's going to tell you the truth about not only how we began, but how it's still impacting us to this day. So I wanted to kind of make that point that King really stuck a pin in that, what you've just said, that all we're asking you to do is live up to what you said on paper. Comment your thoughts on that.
Dr. King was a student of history. Dr. King was such an eloquent, not only speaker, but he was such a deep thinker. He was a philosopher. And so you're absolutely right. No one has ever said, who's been in movements, that other people should be killed. What we are saying is, in these movements, is that we want to have the same access to opportunity, wealth, building, and achievement, and we want the right not to be bullied and policed and controlled and killed. So movements mean that there's the absence of fairness, the absence of due process, the absence of justice. That's why people engage in movements. Movements mean freedom. Movement means having the same benefits, protections, rights, having human rights. And what is so profoundly aggravating is that those in power are able to control the narrative. And to control the narrative means you control thinking, you control outcome, you control resources. So the narrative then has to be suppressed about history, about culture, about contributions. That history has to be suppressed in order to justify the violence perpetuated in social politics.
One of the things that has alarmed me most over the last decade, and particularly in these last months, is the danger of misinformation and disinformation on the life of this republic. Lying, gaslighting, changing facts, not dealing in facts. Like, it is daylight outside right now as you and I are recording this dialogue. It is not nighttime, it is not afternoon, it is morning, and it is daytime. And you would literally have people who will argue with you that it is in fact nighttime, that it is the afternoon. And you're like, wait, no, that's just not factual. We're in this place right now, Dr. Fairfax, where whether it's certain networks, social media platforms, in our education systems. Abject lying is taking place about history, about the journey, and where we are right now. How do we deal with misinformation and disinformation? Because it's a real problem about what's dividing this country right now.
Well, we do what you're doing. You are engaging in responsible journalism. You are engaging your right to showcase the truth to the public and to educate the public. We have to continue to do these kinds of things. We also have to ensure that what we're discussing can be understood by the average person, and also then that can be turned over into meaningful policy solutions by people who are listening. At the heart of what we're seeing is not only the impact of violent social policy, but we're seeing this change in social institutions, right? This change in the judicial system, this change in the way in which a public education as a social institution, the political economy, the way in which public welfare as a social institution is either available for certain people or not available for certain people. And we've got to raise the bar higher, because many of us saw this coming with Project 2025. In fact, I lectured on that at Norfolk State to ensure that people were educated about the harms of Project 20. Going to have to push the button to make sure that corrective narratives are then put out there for people to access and to become elucidated by.
I want to talk about race as a construct, and I want to talk about race for a moment, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it has been a boogeyman for something as simple and tragic as the airliner crash at Reagan earlier this year, late January, early February. And they started saying DEI did it. There was no person of color driving either of those planes or the helicopter. There was a young white woman that was one of the helicopter pilots for the military. And yet everything they say and do, they blame it on DEI. There was even a very offensive dialogue the other day when the Supreme Court, we're going to get into them in a moment, had their ruling, and the attacks on Justice Jackson were stunning. She's unqualified. She's only there because she's a black woman. This is a Harvard magna cum laude graduate, undergrad and law school, and she's unqualified, and the people calling her unqualified have dropped out of community college or have no degree yet. They have the credibility to say that this amazing woman of color is somehow not qualified. Talk to all of our listeners, because we have this Commonwealth, as you know, is very diverse. We have a large South Asian population here, particularly up in Northern Virginia. 25% of the state is African American, but we have pockets in this Commonwealth, Dr. Fairfax, down in the southern, western parts of the state that still fly Confederate flags out in the open. We had a big rift here in the Commonwealth over the Robert E. Lee statutes and all the Confederate statutes, et cetera. So Virginia is an interesting mix of race, racism, sex, sexism, et cetera. Talk a little bit about this attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's so dangerous to the life of this republic.
That attack is an attack on blackness. So in anything, and
not brown people, not women, not others.
I offer this, that it was the civil rights movement that opened the door for rights and protections for everybody.
That's
everybody.
That's
and so the push that black people engaged in politically, economically, philosophically, everybody else benefited from that movement. When we see the attacks on DEI, it's an attack then on black rights, black protections, black and other groups then, yes, suffer due to the lack of an awareness that America developed predicated upon not only the enslavement of African people, but on anti-blackness philosophically and ideologically. And so where there is blackness or anti-blackness, you then find the divisions, and then other people end up suffering. Latinx people and other groups of people who are politically vulnerable. And so that's what I offer. And if you control the narrative, you then control what comes out of that narrative. Certain policies, certain laws, certain resources, or lack thereof. So what we see in the public domain is this constant attack, because what you're doing is you are filling the airway with that kind of information, because what you want to do is normalize it. So the constant attacks against earlier predecessors who served as presidents, their administrations, the constant attacks on Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. It is meant to fill your ears and to submit you into believing that I must be right, because this is what you're hearing over and over and over again. So what you don't hear then, conversely, is you don't hear that people of African descent really were the foundation of what will become America because of centuries of our unpaid labor and the trauma associated with that labor, the products that undergird America: cotton, tobacco, rice, the railroad.
Dr. Fairfax,
You know what I mean? Yeah.
put a pin in that, another aha moment. I want to encourage those of you watching us for this special conversation on America at 2:49, headed into 2:50, to go to James Madison's Montpelier. And they have this wonderful exhibit called The Mere Distinction of Color, which was a phrase used at the time, I believe, by Dolly Madison in a letter, and talking about enslaved persons. But the difference between what Monticello does, which focuses heavy on Sally Hemings' relationship with Jefferson and their offspring and giving her space there, Montpelier digs into the economics that you just got into. And it is a staggering, sobering, stunning exhibit that shows how rich the colonies became due to slave labor. Cotton, tobacco, sugar, etc., all the textiles, trading with Europe, with Queen Victoria, etc., pre-Civil War, etc. And then once the crops became not as profitable, human trafficking, don't miss what I'm saying, the importing of people from Africa and then the selling of your slaves, and then when you fathered children, selling them off, they became more valuable than the crops. That is a history that needs to be taught, because as Dr. Fairfax said, and I'm going to get into my legal constitutional scholar role here for a moment. Stick with me, Colita.
Yeah.
Just this past week, the Supreme Court dealt with birthright citizenship, or they worked around it. They're going to come back to it in the fall. But one of the arguments that the Republican conservatives and Project 2025 makes, and it is a cynical argument, although true, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution all deal with black people, slaves. That's absolutely true. And what Dr. Fairfax has just married for you, she brought it forward from the radical Republicans of the 60s that passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. How ironic is that? And move into the civil rights movement post-Jim Crow. Black people, the rights that we established, that due process, that birthright citizenship that everybody's talking about, it starts with us, because it deals with enslaved persons being given 13th Amendment, their freedom, 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, due process rights, to be treated the same, have birthright citizenship like anybody else. And then the 15th Amendment gave black men, not black women, the right to vote. Fairfax married for us. I've just kind of laid the table why they're focusing on this birthright citizenship. And it looks like it's on brown people, on immigrants and migrants, right? But it's going to affect all of us if they do away with it. But talk about why is there this focus, this hardcore pivot to getting rid of immigrants and migrants who've been here, over 11 million or more of them, 20, 30, 40 years, pay their taxes, good people, trying to have a place in America. Talk about why we're focused on this right now. What's going on?
Well, from my judgment, and we should include indigenous people. Indigenous people were also provided citizenship, but that created another issue for indigenous people, because then that citizenship under the white settler project, if you will, nullified citizenship from their own vantage point as the people who had been here prior to what America would become. And there's several indigenous scholars who write really prolifically about that subject matter. What we're seeing is, if you get rid of, if you will, if you deport people who are vulnerable politically, economically, and who are identified as Latinx people, and you strip rights then from people of African descent, black people, you have a country predicated upon whiteness. And so what you do is, again, you purport certain narratives about Black culture, Black intellectualism, Black power, Black advancement, Black authority, and you justify then that propaganda in going after certain institutional behaviors and then the lack of rights, citizenship rights that Black people would be able then to enforce. We see this laid out perfectly right now. This is exactly what they were doing. And of course, I'm going to mention again, this was all laid out in Project 2025. So it is to strip Black people of those entitlements and those protections and rights that we fought for. And it is also to deport vulnerable people who are Latinx and who are also of other race. And if you have African people who are being deported, you have West Indian people who are being deported, you have Asians who are being deported. It means that the only group of people who have rights in this country would be white people.
Yeah, and I think that this administration, these policies, they're not even hiding the ball. We have masked men literally roaming about, snatching people off the streets. No warrants, no due process, no identifier that I'm law enforcement. I have a lawful right to take you in, to question you, to see what your status is, and to see what we need to do. People are being snatched off the streets. People who are citizens are being snatched and sent away.
But for those of us with the historical experience, we've seen this before. The Ku Klux Klan and other white vigilante groups did the exact same thing. Even
slave patrols.
Absolutely, but post-enslavement, Black men who would engage in the civil rights movement, registering people to vote, would have their homes bombed, would have people enter their homes. People could not defend themselves. They would be dragged out and they would be beaten and lynched. Black men who were economically independent. Black men who also employed other people in the community. Black men who held certain influence status. So citizenship rights have always been vulnerable for Black folks. There were some protections, yes, but there's always been a vulnerability. And so what is happening now with ICE happened before. And I should mention, many of us in the academic community tried to educate people, again, about what's in Project 2025, what could happen, what could occur, and we see it unfold. This is not new. This is not new. No.
Let's talk about, switch for a moment from the birthright citizenship and the assaults of ICE on, our fellow migrants, immigrants, etc. I don't like calling people illegal because there are no illegal human beings. Switch over to the University of Virginia. This thing hit home this past week. Academic freedom. University of Virginia is a public institution. It's always in the top 3 colleges to go to in the country in U.S. News and World Reports and Newsweek, etc. When they do the rankings, it's always in the top 3. It is a Southern Ivy School, if you will, a top public university, and the president was basically forced out by tweet because the president of the United States of America started attacking UVA and the president because he felt they hadn't got rid of their DEI enough. Therefore, they were going to start taking grants and money. You've seen them do this to Harvard and other institutions. What are your thoughts as a professor of social justice on the fact that we have a president now who is clearly abusing his executive authority and going after college presidents and threatening them if they don't do what he says, and then they're resigning? What are your thoughts about this?
But this was also laid out again in Project 2025. I should mention that the author of the chapter on education in Project 2025 on the Board of Visitors at George Mason University.
Wow.
This was foreshadowing. And so when we saw the president go after Harvard, every university should have known that sooner or later that kind of command would be knocking on their door. It is my understanding that President Ryan was very effective in ensuring that UVA continued to evolve as a university, working to reckon with its history and sponsorship of enslavement and benefit of enslavement.
Its founder, Thomas Jefferson, used his slaves to build it. Yes.
To build it, absolutely. And also ensure that narrative would be told and that students would be educated about that narrative. It's my understanding that conservative groups in Charlottesville continue to have issues with President Ryan and, in fact, continue to work behind the scenes to effectively engage his ouster, which is what has happened. I'm going to say that UVA stands as a beacon of what a public ivy is supposed to be doing. And that just simply is not within the ideological perspective of people who want complete authority, complete control, complete autonomy and power over everyone. Now, when you consider HBCUs then are rendered vulnerable. If student loan debt is decreased, is not available, that impacts HBCUs because many of our students are either first generation students or they need those loans for their tuition. We are very vulnerable right now under this president.
Right. And I think that, and folks, again, there's a method to my madness here, and I'm going to do an epilogue at the end from this conversation because it's an important one and it's a bit different from what we've done in our other chats where we've talked to political figures and leaders about the politics. And we're going to get into that in a moment because I think it's always good to have someone like Dr. Fairfax, who's not a political person. She's not wedded to one thing and the other. She's an educator to talk about the moment we find ourselves in politically. But I think that this situation with the University of Virginia, like you said, is instructive because it goes back to the notion, what will you do when they come for you? Because ultimately they will come. If we stand silent, as it happens to Harvard, University of Virginia, or Columbia, or whomever, if we stand silent when they're snatching those that clean our homes or do our yards, et cetera, and we just turn the other way and go, well, that doesn't impact me, we are setting ourselves up. And I want to talk about this big, beautiful bill for a moment. This big, beautiful, bad bill. Now, yesterday, Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina announced he would not seek re-election because he is tired of being a rubber stamp for Trump. He's tired. He wants to be free. He wants to say what he wants to say. He wants to tell the truth. Sad that he only figured this out a year or so before re-election. I wish he had done this from the beginning. But he was one of the ones that voted for impeachment, so that was a problem for him and Cassidy and some of the others. But I say that to say that's one senator in a caucus of senators I can tell you as a former lifelong Republican who's got a lot of friends on that side of the aisle. They all feel that way. Lisa Murkowski, but they're all afraid. So we have sitting United States senators, Dr. Fairfax, the most powerful body on earth, one of 100. You are powerful when you are a senator. And they are afraid to say no. They are afraid to stand up. So this big, beautiful bill, when it passes, because I expect that it will, unfortunately, and be signed, tens of millions of people, these are facts, folks, check me, don't believe me, and it's in Project 2025, like Dr. Fairfax says. Tens of millions of people are going to lose their health care through the Obamacare. That's subsidized in some ways through Medicaid. Medicaid will be gone. So if you have a parent who's getting Medicaid support for their nursing or rehab care because your family doesn't have a lot of means and money, that's going to be gone. There are families who have minor children who don't have money, who won't be able to get them what they need because they're disabled. Dr. Fairfax, one of the things I've seen on social media, and it's phenomenal, is a lot of MAGA people who are white Southerners in Alabama and places where they've gotten rid of jobs and they're going to lose their Medicaid. They're starting to wake up and go, wait a minute. I didn't think this was going to hit me. This was about those people, those brown DEI people it's those people. It wasn't supposed to hit me. Talk to me about, again, this moment we find ourselves in where folks who thought they were going to get rid of other people or take away other people's stuff find themselves losing their stuff now. And then walk us through the politics of this and kind of where you see us headed into this next election cycle in 26.
Yeah, I go back to, I think, my first point in our discussion. America decided to maintain a very deliberate narrative where white people were at the center of everything, of all of the benefits of policies and programs and resources, the availability of resources. And America decided never to really reckon with enslavement, Jim Crow Reconstruction, the violence of that, which really was an apartheid system. The violence then perpetuated under indigenous people and their economic isolation. America continued, even within the 20th century, America continued, never departed from a pattern of how it functioned. And so it was very easy for someone who occupies the White House now to ascend because America just decided purposefully to not solve certain social conditions to not ensure that there would be a fair curricula throughout the entire country taught to all students. America decided that some institutions deserved funding and others did not. My former pastor, who is deceased, made a great point years ago. Budgets are moral documents.
Yes.
So yes, now people who thought that they would not be under the umbrella of contempt now find themselves under the umbrella of contempt, are realizing, oh my gracious, this is not a narrative that I thought would. I didn't think this is different. Yeah, it is different because we're talking about authoritarianism now, and that includes you.
Say that louder for us. What are we talking about?
Authoritarianism, and that includes you too.
Everybody.
So, everybody. And,
Fascism.
Yeah, really. And so, and part of the challenge is we continue, we meaning the country, continue not to really educate people about what America is really supposed to be. Now, I think Black people have done that always. We've always pushed the philosophical ideas.
For survival, right? We didn't have a choice.
We had to. We influenced, we perfected those principles to be meted out in all institutions. We did that, and everybody's benefited from that. But as long as certain people were not suffering, everything was fine. But you're right. When this bill passes, and I think unfortunately it will pass, it will devastate people. And you mentioned something I want to just go back to. When you mentioned that there are senators who are afraid, listen, those senators are functioning out of a certain ideological narrative. So they never imagined, I think, they would find themselves in the positions that they do.
I think that's right. And I think that they love that power more than they don't. But here's the problem. You have no power.
None.
You've ceded your Article 1 power as the Congress to check the Article 2 executive. The courts now have been effectively neutered by the Supreme Court, which is a whole nother discussion we ain't getting in today because I can't talk about them today.
Yeah.
But let me finalize it and wrap our discussion with this. Dr. Fairfax, we talked about history, the distortion of history, the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, etc. Let's talk about what we do going into that 200th birthday next year. What do we need to do to build bridges, Black, white, yellow, red, gay, straight, Muslim, Christian, Jewish? What needs to happen here to fix this? Because this isn't sustainable. We're going in the wrong direction.
We are definitely going in the wrong direction. And next year, with all of these midterm elections, with elections or new governors, new people who are entering office based upon whatever elections are going to occur this fall, there needs to be a very different way in which curriculum is taught in public schools, in which funding is provided, and there need to be a recommitment to simply solving and eliminating certain issues of the human condition. We have to just be very radical in this approach to ensure that where there is human suffering, there should be a policy correction. Where there is human degradation, there should be a policy correction to that.
And that's all human beings.
And that is everybody. That is everybody. Absolutely.
Right. And again, and folks, a little bit of a, Dr. Fairfax, before I get into my kind of close wrap here, tell us where folks can follow you on social media and how do we find you and follow your greatness?
I don't know about me being great, but I'm on X, Colita Fairfax, and I'm also on Blue Sky.
Yep.
With the same title, Colita Fairfax. Would love to connect with people, have meaningful engagement.
Yes.
Meaningful. Respectful. And to talk about policy solutions. And if I could also go back to something
Sure.
You said, you have such provocative questions. When we talk about the 250th, I understand people wanting to celebrate 1776, but the 250th celebration can be a start of discussing and educating people about the Great Betrayal. Because it's difficult for the Black community to celebrate 1776, knowing that enslavement was still the political, economic, capitalistic system of the country, which the framers decided to really do nothing about, and that our freedom wouldn't come until 80 years later with the Emancipation Proclamation, and with some people, given what 250 1,000 people in Texas, some people in Delaware, some people in other parts of the country wouldn't experience freedom, be granted freedom until 2 or 3 years afterward. That can be, the 250th can be a great point of departure to discussing radically what needs to change.
I could not agree more, which is why I wanted to have you here to set the table on the 249th, because it gives us a year to talk to each other, to realize that something dark has come over us, that there is, like you said, it's no longer Republican or Democrat, it's authoritarianism and fascism. You know, this whole notion of woke or socialism, if feeding people, not taking lunches from hungry babies, giving elderly care, making sure that our parents have the Social Security they paid for, by the way, if that is socialism and wokeness, well, I guess I'm a woke socialist, right? But that's not it at all. That's being a decent Christian human being, in my opinion.
And that's exactly the way that things should be framed. I hope I didn't lose you.
No, you didn't. You're
Right.
here.
That's exactly the way.
Yeah,
That's exactly the way those issues should be framed. Very plainly. Very plainly.
And so at the Forward Party, and again, you know, when I was telling my peers on the state committee that I wanted to do this is a courageous conversation. This is a little bit out of the box. But we are that third rail. We know that the data is trending that most people in most states are registered as independents overwhelmingly, but they've opted out of voting. We know that Democrats and Republicans are winning primaries. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia last week, we had a primary where only 28% of the electorate showed up to put in the candidate for lieutenant governor for the Democratic Party here in the Commonwealth. We're going to have a woman governor at the end of this year, whoever it's going to be, and that's progress. But it is...
It depends upon your
right. I mean, I hear you, but I'm saying it's a fascinating thing that it's rare that you have both major parties having two women run, so you're going to have a woman. And I think that's probably a historic first. It will be here in Virginia for sure. But I say that to say that we're at this precipice where we're going to have to do something, folks. Our soror, Coretta Scott King, talked about freedom has to be won again in every generation.
Yes.
It's not free. It doesn't just show up on your doorstep. And I think we're in the fight of our life right now for whatever this is going to be. But I love that you said this can be the start of a dialogue. So I hope that you as a historian and the role you have and me and the role I have, I hope that we can have some of these discussions over the next year. The Forward Party is going to be doing a statewide tour. We're going to go to every single city and place in the Commonwealth, and we're going to listen. And we're going to talk and we're going to engage. I'm excited to be part of that as the communications director for the state party. And just, we are trying to hear what Virginians want and what they need. There's too much money in politics.
Yeah.
There's too much division in politics. There's too much anger in our politics. You agree? Am I wrong, right?
You are not wrong. You are not wrong. And the percentages are low because one reason is that we've always had a percentage of people who simply don't believe voting matters. Mm-hmm. There's also another percent of people who would have voted, but they are so disillusioned. And part of the disillusionment is that America has decided not to fix anything and to play the blame game. And both parties tend to play the blame game. However, what we do find ourselves is that one major party is absolutely functioning as a white nationalist party. It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And the other party needs to say some radically different.
They're reactionary.
They are reactionary. Show people what your policy ideas are. And I'm not going to show up for the photo op. I want to hear the policy.
Well, yeah, it's why you see black voters and brown voters leaving the Democratic Party in numbers that should alarm, but going over to the Republican Party is not a good option.
Not a good
It's a non-functioning party when you have United States senators saying, I'm afraid in my caucus, I can't really vote. I know this is a bad bill. And you had people like Josh Hawley saying this was a bad bill, but at the end of the day, he fell in line. He represents a state, Indiana, that has a lot of challenges economically. It's in the Midwest. They have a large African-American and people of color population there, and people who have been laid off from manufacturing jobs. You said something profound. They decided not to fix it, and people have just opted out. What I wanted to do today, folks, was to say you gotta opt back in.
Absolutely. We have no choice if we expect something different for our children and for succeeding our nieces, our nephews, our godchildren, for succeeding generations. We have no choice but to lean in, get to work, and work to change the narrative and to provide corrective historical narratives coupled with meaningful policy solutions to eliminate the social conditions that we just need to solve and we need to eliminate. But that means also, I'm going to say, an altering of the economic political infrastructure. Yes, it means then that wealth sharing, resource sharing, redistribution of resources, but we've got to be committed to that. And no one should enter into politics if they're not committed to that. People who are in politics, now people who are scared to vote, they should not ever have entered politics. They were selfish.
Amen. Man, I think of Margaret Chase Smith, and her Declaration of Conscience during McCarthy's going after people with the Red Scare and everything. He's bullying people, right? And he's ruining people's lives. And have you no decency, sir? She stands up and she gives her four-pointer of what you do in public service, in civic engagement, and it is not that. And at the end of the day, when a United States Senator, Lisa Murkowski, I'm talking to you, who sold us out on your vote, when you're a Murkowski, they elected her as a write-in. She never has to worry about being reelected in Alaska.
Right.
And they still won't do the right thing, which tells you there's a deeper problem. So I think when you have United States senators being afraid, that should tell you something's broken. And I agree with you that we need a new generation of leadership. We need people that are unafraid. And one of the problems, though, Dr. Fairfax, is politics is so nasty. I know I've wanted to put my name on a ballot several times. And every time I talk myself out of it, because I go, do you really want that in your life? Do you want that type of hate, nasty vitriol on you, on your family? And that's a shame that people, they run away because they don't want to deal with the nasty. And now it could cost you your life. Can you talk a moment about political violence? Because I don't want to leave without getting into what happened in Minnesota with the state speaker delegate and her husband being shot to death. They saved their children, shielding them with their own bodies. Their dog was even shot to death. And then the other state senator and his wife, thank God, survived, but will have to have a lot of surgeries and work. Talk to us about the political violence that we see.
So the political violence is a part of the violence of rhetoric. It's a part of the violence of ideology. It's a part of the violence that we saw play out in the campaigns. Listen, years ago, we saw someone running for the presidency who mocked a disabled person, essentially rendering disabled people inhumane and fodder for comedy. The way in which women have been categorized. The way in which black women are particularly categorized as loud.
President of the United States called a reporter the other day a dog, and he's done it before. He's done it with the three black Yamich,
exactly.
Abby, and April.
Right. And so the violence starts off with words. And then you have people like the nut who shot those legislators in Minnesota acting out on that violence. Let me say to you, I wasn't surprised. And honestly, I'm not surprised. That's the only thing that we see. But I think we will see a lot more of it. And also we will see more heartbreaking images of ICE going after people who are vulnerable with regards to citizenship. And sooner or later, something is going to happen with someone who we know in our network because of the violence and lawlessness that is essentially part and parcel of this quest for authoritarian rule.
Right. That this has been a very instructive dialogue. You and I could talk all day, all the time. I want to do, again, when we do our tour, we're definitely coming through Norfolk, and I'm hoping to do something and work with you and your folks there because I want to engage students. I want to engage the young people and what they want, what they need, what is the future they want. And I just want to say to everyone as we wrap this down, again, different dialogue for us here, but that's what being the third rail allows you to be. We don't have to play by the rules of the other parties and worry about being politically correct or not correct. We are about serving we the people and taking government back. And I think Dr. Fairfax said it right, that social policies and budgets, where we put our money and our resources, they tell you what our character is. If we're talking about literally ripping people off of Medicaid, That means, do you guys not understand that nursing homes in this country, if you live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I don't know what it is down in your region, Dr. Fairfax, but here in Northern Virginia, if you have to put a parent in memory care or nursing care and you have any kind of means, a job, whatever, and your parents have a 401k, whatever they have, you're looking at anywhere from $8,000 a month on a low up to $11,000 a month. Did you hear me?
Listen,
That's 3 houses, right? A month.
people are
Who can
already,
afford that?
and people are struggling with healthcare. And why is it that healthcare companies are billion-dollar companies? That they're not healthcare companies. They're not. It's no way in the world.
They're corporate again.
Absolutely.
You only need look at Jeff Bezos' wedding this weekend in Venice. I have no problem with people getting married. You got money, do what you want to do. But here's a guy that doesn't pay his workers the right wage and doesn't want to give them health benefits. And he's a gazillionaire on his way to being a trillionaire. I think he's the first trillionaire with Amazon post-COVID. And he takes an $8,000 a year draw as his salary and defers his comp because he's a very rich man and pays no taxes.
No.
You and I pay taxes.
Yes.
The regular working people of this Commonwealth, in this country, we pay taxes.
Pay taxes.
It might be a little, it might be a lot. But for the men that now sit atop with their cryptocurrency and Peter Thiel and his boys, and they're against diversity. They're railing against equity and inclusion, and they get richer and richer and richer. Folks, at what point do you realize this is a game? And Dr. Fairfax said it best. This is about the order of white male patriarchy. You don't have to like it. You can say that we're being feminist or radical. We're not. We're just giving it to you. This big, beautiful bill is going to hurt white people, black people, all kind of people are going to get hurt. It is not just the other.
No.
Right, Dr. Fairfax? It's going to hurt a lot of Americans.
It's going to hurt. If it's not going to hurt you, then you're going to, though, know people who will be hurt by it.
Absolutely right. But I was talking about the healthcare piece with Medicaid and explaining that, again, if someone like me or you, if one of our parents got sick and didn't have the means, we're going to have to try to figure out how to help them because they're not going to qualify for Medicaid.
No, they won't, even though they worked.
When they qualify for Medicaid, and this is important here, you got to find a bed. There has to be a space for your loved one.
Yes.
And the facilities aren't the best.
No.
The care isn't the best because they're overwhelmed.
But nor are there enough facilities. Just like in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there are not enough facilities for people with mental health needs. There are not enough beds. I spoke with a woman this year who works for the Richmond Behavioral Health. And she told me there are people who call from other states looking for a bed. And they have to tell them, we can't even provide a bed for people who live in our state.
So let me recap, folks, because, again, Dr. Fairfax and I'll go on and on and on. We talked about a lot of issues today because we are at birthday 249, headed into this big celebration we're going to have in 2026 about America's sesquicentennial, the Declaration of Independence, which Dr. Fairfax believes in, I believe in. It was good that we declared our independence from a king and broke off. By the way, we don't do kings here if you didn't know. So you might want to think about that, some of y'all out there. But more importantly, while we were declaring our independence and our freedom, the founding fathers kept enslaved 1/3 of the population at the time. I said 1/3 of the population at the time in the southern colonies, okay? So this all wraps together, Dr. Fairfax. We're intertwined. We have this mutuality that Dr. King talked about. And I think it's time that we moved forward together. I thank you so much for being my guest today. This was
my honor.
Amazing. Come back, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So grateful.